What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jose Ramos Jr. And if you're a fan of pro wrestling as much as I am, then you've come to the right channel. And obviously, fresh off the heels of another episode of Friday Night SmackDown, you know I had to hop on a video and record something for you guys. Being that Friday Night SmackDown emanated from Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in all of sports and entertainment, you knew something was going to happen. Obviously, we had the Bloodline ceremony that closed out the show, and I think a lot of anticipation had been building as to what the WWE had in store in regards to this storyline. I think most of us thought it would be some kind of return, some kind of interference from an outside member. Obviously, we knew it would include the introduction of Jacob Fatu into the Bloodline, but I can speak for myself when I said that Roman Reigns or Jimmy Uso would have been likely candidates to show up during this ceremony. I think obviously, given the situation that Roman Reigns is dealing with right now with the unfortunate passing of his father, I think that was an easy way to go ahead and cross him off the list. I think he should take as much time as he needs in order to be with his loved ones and his family during this difficult time. That is why I thought the next most, obvious answer really would have been Jimmy Uso. He's been out for quite some time, ever since Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa have taken over the Bloodline alongside Solo Sikoa. So what happened next in this segment really came a shock to me. But let's back up and let's start at the top of the show. Obviously, we would see the arrival of the Bloodline, Solo Sikoa, the Tongans, without Jacob Fatu, and Paul Heyman was very inquisitive. He was very confused, and he questioned where was Jacob Fatu, and Solo Sikoa assured him he's not here. Now, for eagle-eye viewers of the WWE and loyalists who watch it all the time, and anyone really who watches pro wrestling, whenever someone tells you one thing, you can always expect the opposite. So knowing that Solo Sikoa has become a unreliable narrator, we cannot trust him at face value. Whatever he's saying to Paul Heyman or to the audience, we have to take it with a grain of salt. So I think, for one, that was already a red flag in my book. Then we see them arrive into the arena, out into the ring, and are met by the babyfaces, Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton, and Kevin Owens, as they had a fantastic brawl to open up the show that included a dive from Kevin Owens on the top of the stands onto concrete through a table, of course, which really looked like it might have left him banged up. I hope he's okay. I'm sure he's fine and he'll fight through it. But just a great way to open up the show, and especially when you're in an arena like Madison Square Garden in front of New York City, you want to get the people going early on, and that they did. Obviously, throughout the night, we saw interactions between Paul Heyman and the Bloodline, and what concluded was the segment of the night. We saw in the Bloodline ceremony, we saw the introduction of Jacob, as I mentioned, and we also saw how Solo Sikoa has really demanded not only the respect, but the acknowledgement of the Bloodline, as well as the audience. One by one, it was Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, and then Jacob Fatu, who all professed their admiration, their respect for Solo Sikoa by acknowledging him in the very same way that a Roman Reigns would have done for the last 4 years. And finally, when we got to Paul Heyman, tears in his eyes. And by the way, if you look at Paul Heyman, you can see he's gone through it. I mean, the texture on his face, the redness in his eyes, he's beginning to grow a little bit of stubble, a beard, very much alike to in 2012 or 2013 when he was with CM Punk. And you saw that he had developed this almost crazed look on his face, like he was losing sleep. Very much so as to how, when there's times when Roman Reigns is absent and he's away from the company, you get to see this very wary look upon Paul Heyman, and he does so well on it. I think he's one of the best performers that the WWE has to offer, not only because of his intelligence and because of his historian, but because just as an overall presence, he enhances any segment that he's a part of. And in doing so, Solo Sikoa reveals that he has the very same, the beads, necklace, I don't know the proper terminology for them, but the very same, gear that they would place upon Roman Reigns as the head of the table, as the tribal chief. And he gives it to Paul Heyman and asks him, "Wiseman, I need you to acknowledge me." And for a moment there, we thought Paul Heyman was going to do so, and he held it. He paused. He said, "Solo, I love you." And again, a subtle pause. And this is where I thought maybe we were going to get an appearance by a Jimmy Uso. But what followed next really floored me, because I wasn't ready for this. He finally stands up to Solo and he says, "I acknowledge you as not my tribal chief. And what ensued was one of the biggest beatdowns I think the Bloodline has done in all of its history. Obviously, in terms of the violence, in terms of the action itself, there has been more. There has been much more destruction in their path. But because of what this means, the wise man, the man that was untouchable for the longest, Paul Heyman, refusing to acknowledge Solo Sikoa, was met with a Samoan spike. And immediately a splash from Jacob Fatu. And that in itself, I thought, was very interesting because you never see Paul Heyman take a bump like that. In fact, I had a conversation recently with my brother, and we thought about Paul Heyman and how he doesn't really take that many bumps. You don't really see him get physical, with the exception of maybe one shot here and there. But to actually take a splash from the top rope was something. And then after that, the Bloodline takes Paul Heyman out of the ring and they lift him up for that triple power bomb. And again, before they lifted him up, I thought there was a chance that we were going to get Jimmy Uso or Roman Reigns. Again, highly doubtful given the situation in his personal life. But for a moment there, I thought someone surely is going to come out, right? It's New York, it's Madison Square Garden. This is the type of crowd that you want to provide a moment for. Except that wasn't the moment that we were all thinking of because, like I said, a triple power bomb through the announce table is what Paul Heyman was met with. And in that moment, I thought, well, of course, it's MSG. You want to have these memorable moments. And this is a moment that we will certainly remember. Paul Heyman, the wise man, one of the greatest managers, in my opinion, the greatest manager of all time, a WWE Hall of Famer, taken out by the Bloodline. The only question now is, where do we go from here? How long do we see Paul Heyman out? Because I think this is a great way to write him off. It's just a matter of how long. And when he does return, does he return alone? I don't think so. I think this lends itself as the beginning stages of reforming that original incarnation of the Bloodline with Roman Reigns, Jimmy Uso, Jey Uso, and because the Bloodline, as it's currently constructed, has 4 members, who's going to be that 4th guy to team with the Usos and Roman Reigns? I think it has to be Sami Zayn. I know there are a lot of people out there saying that they need to include Zilla Fatu in this storyline. I think he's a little too young. I think it's too early. I think there's a lot of potential down the road. But given the incarnation of the Bloodline that's being told right now, how fitting would it be for the Usos and Roman to team up with the honorary Us, Sami Zayn? It'll take a lot, in terms of storytelling because of the history there and because of the fallout of that Bloodline run. But I do think that they can come together for Paul Heyman and have this, maybe not a babyface run, but certainly a match. And I think this is what we're going to lead to at War Games. Like, mark it right now. I think a lot of people can agree that the War Games matchup is tailor-made for this story, for the Bloodline in general. It's just a matter of figuring out the pieces and who is going to be involved. But I myself am very ecstatic and excited for the prospect of what this story could end up evolving into. Roman Reigns will come back. We know this. Jimmy will come back. We know this. But will we be able to see a reunion of the Bloodline? And keep in mind, it's only been, a year since that iteration had broken up? Sami, of course, left the Bloodline in January of 2023. Jey Uso would follow him in, July of 2023? And then Jimmy, Solo, and Roman Reigns would run the rest of the year as the Bloodline up until WrestleMania 40, where we would see Roman Reigns lose. And then the introduction of the Tongans and Jacob Fatu. A lot of tumultuous moments happening within the Bloodline. But yet again, just wonderful storytelling. And as long as you remain patient, you're rewarded with big moments like this. And the crowd, rightfully so, yelling expletives at Solo Sikoa. They were chanting F Solo. And it's just fantastic. It's a great time to be following the product, a great time to be following the Bloodline. And we'll see the developments that will be made further. Of course, guys, keep in touch. Keep on watching the content, just like I'm watching the content. And I'll be releasing videos probably like this more often regarding Friday Night SmackDown, because for me, it's really become appointment television. I can't not miss an episode of SmackDown because of moments like this. And it's not just for SmackDown, but Monday Night Raw, of course, as well. But given that Monday Night Raw is a 3-hour show and it's a little bit later, you guys know the whole schedule. I think Friday Night SmackDown is definitely an opportunity to capitalize on stories like this. But go ahead and sound off in the comments, but let me know what you guys are thinking about this Paul Heyman attack. How do you expect them to reintroduce the key players regarding the Bloodline? And do you guys anticipate this, as much as I do, to be the Bloodline versus Bloodline in a War Games matchup at the Survivor Series? Of course, also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up to date with all the pro wrestling content that is produced on this channel. And with that being said, of course, my name is Jose Ramos Jr., and I will see you guys in the next video.